We're back now with round 2 of the Sunday Scrum. Susan Riley, Rosemary Barton are in Ottawa, and the CBC's David Gray joins us from Calgary. And I'm glad he's here because we're anticipating a very dramatic election in Alberta. So, David, what's happening here? Just tell us what's going to happen.
Hannah, I wish I knew. I really do. This appears to be Alberta's own very special Game of Thrones moment. You know, everybody wondering if winter's actually coming for the Tories after 44 years. It's a remarkable situation. The surprise, of course, is the New Democrats. That's what everybody's been talking about because they keep showing up in the polls and showing up strong in the polls. If you believe the polls, then they seem to have sewn up Edmonton. The northern part of Alberta, well, that's always a toss-up, but that was probably going to be mostly Wildrose or PC. NDs could make some headway there. We'll find out what happens. The southern half of the province, again, according to the polls, defiantly Wildrose. Who would have thought of that? Everyone thought that party had been extinguished before this campaign had started. Which means the battleground is here in Calgary. I've been at I don't know how many different events over the last few days. It's what everybody is talking about in this city. There's plans for strategic voting and how you can make this work. And then there's all this scaremongering that's been coming out over the last week, as it was last election. The big talk right now, you heard it from Jim Prentice, Alberta is not an NDP province. That's what he likes to say. I spoke to him last week. He mentioned the NDP 7 times in 7 minutes in one interview. So clearly that's what he's focused on right now. But he's fighting a war on 2 fronts, which is new for the Tories here. They're getting it from the left and the right. It's a toss-up right now in a really interesting election.
Yeah, we talk about a toss-up. You were talking at polls, though, before, at the first there. Polls can be a smidge deceiving, wouldn't you say? Do you think people might back off at the last minute, Susan?
Well, I was going to ask David, if you don't mind.
Sure.
David, do you,
we're switching roles.
You know how they always say in elections that the turnout really determines things, and I wonder, David, do you think we're going to get like a 75% turnout or something like that, or not? Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, we all know that polls often don't translate into seats, especially when you consider where a lot of the polling takes place and who's answering their phone when. So leave that aside. Now you've got the issue. You've got so many new Albertans here over the last 4 to 8 years. Literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who move from distant lands like Ontario and Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where oddly enough, they actually change governments every once in a while. Who knows how those folks are going to vote? I do hope for a big voter turnout. There's a huge amount of interest right now, particularly over this last weekend, where a lot of people are talking about strategic voting and is this the time for change? Let's hope there's a big turnout. It wouldn't surprise me if there was, but I got to throw one more kicker into that.
Sure.
There's a Flames game on Tuesday night.
Oh.
What effect that'll have, you tell me.
Oh, that's another good point. Rosie, I want to bring you in here.
Maybe the Flames will win.
So if you want a prediction, I'm still going to say Flames in 7.
Rosie, do you think the success so far of the provincial NDP will have any after effects with Mulcair in the federal election?
Well, they're watching it very closely. It was strange at the end of this week. Well, maybe not so strange to see Rachel Notley say, "Oh no, I barely know Tom Mulcair. He hasn't called me," even though a large portion of his office is out there working for her on leave. I think she has to do that in Alberta because Mulcair's message around oil sands has been, very aggressive. So she needs to publicly distance herself from Mulcair. I don't think that will last, however, if she were to form government. And I think it gives the NDP all sorts of hopes, right? I mean, the worst thing that could happen for them, though, would be that she forms government, a minority or majority government, because it's possible that Albertans, and David obviously knows them better, might want to balance things out in the province a little bit. And you see that often in Ontario, in Quebec, that people want sort of a little bit different view federally than they have provincially. So I actually am not sure that a win would be the best thing federally for the NDP, but just to see this, just the prospect that this could be possible, it's so amazing. And I think what it does, and David, you can speak to this better, but I think that it really changes other Canadians' perhaps stereotypes about Alberta. Like, that's what it also is going to do.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that it's so much more than you had thought, that it's so much more diverse, and that's only a good thing, I think, for Alberta.
Well, I'm a little alarmed the secret's getting out. That's a little frightening. But yeah, we have Toronto's mayor, remember? So yeah, there's always been that great diversity in Alberta. This province has changed so much.
Yeah.
The people are so young here. The median age is, what, 35, 36 years old.
Right.
But for years and years and years in Alberta, everybody's voted for the party that represented prosperity. And for 44 years and 37 years before that with the Social Credit, that has always represented one party. The tough times right now, and you've got Jim Prentice running on a fairly gloom and doom budget, which he thought he could do, and he thought he could get away with because he had eliminated the opposition. It was the biggest floor crossing in Canadian history when the Wild Rose came over. Who knows what's going to happen this time?
Okay. Go ahead. Quick.
Well, I was
Susan?
just going to say, yeah, just in terms of blowback here or potential advantage to the NDP here, Rachel Notley is going to run, if she wins a government of any kind, a very different government from the one Mr. Mulcair will run, and that's not unusual. We've got a so-called nominally liberal government in British Columbia that's actually a conservative government. You know, we've got NDP governments in the prairies that are the NDP government in the Prairie that's kind of a liberal government. We've got Brad Wall, who's kind of a progressive conservative. I mean, they don't really match or fit necessarily.
Now, I want to move on to the Duffy trial. It went on hiatus until Monday, but they're back. And Rosie, you're probably following this trial closer than anyone. What was the takeaway? Sorry, what was that?
We're closer than you, like you and I, about the same. Yeah.
I'll be back with you.
Yeah.
So what was your takeaway from last week, and what can we expect this week?
You know, there wasn't a whole lot happening inside the courtroom. I don't think that things are going particularly well for the Crown at this stage. I think they're fully aware of that, and they need to start bringing in some slightly stronger witnesses, let's say, who can try and beef up their case against Mr. Duffy. So on the other side, I would say that in that courtroom, things are going fairly well for Mr. Duffy, that his lawyer, and I've said this many times, is very skilled and seems to be beating particularly the issue of rules and lack of rules very well. There are other issues that are going to be more problematic for him, specifically around contracts. This week, we're going to have some legal wrangling early in the week, and then we'll see how things unfold. What becomes more and more apparent is that I may never get out of that courtroom.
Yeah,
like
we'll see you there.
It's taking a very, very, very long time. And so for people who thought this might be wrapped up before the election, like, obviously forget it. Even, like, let's start thinking about next year. You know, I just think it's going to take a much longer time than anyone had predicted.
We're going to have to bring better lunches, I think, into that courtroom. Susan, we also learned the secret Senate audit that hasn't been made public yet. It's going to be the 1st of June. Could potentially help Duffy. Do you think that's true?
Well, it'll damn the whole Senate. See, here's the problem. If Duffy's guilty, everybody's guilty, or practically. A lot of other as yet unnamed senators are also guilty. If he gets off, they're still guilty. Because if he gets off charges of fraud and the other things, 31 counts, I think, right? Yeah. The evidence as it unfolds has still turned up a lot of very kind of dodgy, let's say greedy, let's say petty, let's say dishonest, you know, morally questionable expense claims from Mr. Duffy. But again, it appears that he was not alone, and in some cases, his expenses, he wasn't even in the top 20, I don't think, of big spenders. So the more it morphs into a trial of the Senate,
which is what Bain is really trying to do, the lack of rules, no rules.
He's making a very convincing case, I think, Hannah. I really, you know, I think a lot of Canadians will think, yeah, Duffy's, you know, took advantage of his position. Whether or not he broke the law remains for the judge to decide, but he's not the only one. That doesn't make it better, but it probably makes it easier for him.
David?
Let me pinch in from the West if I can.
I can't wait.
This is exactly the kind of story that got Burt Brown off his tractor 23 years ago in Balzac, Alberta, and made him champion a Triple E Senate. And of course, what's interesting about that is that that was the reform movement that brought Stephen Harper eventually into office in Ottawa. And it's unbelievable to me that somehow the Prime Minister's office in any way is getting entangled or being tied to a story that's having to do with the Senate this many years later. There isn't a whole lot of interest in this trial, to be honest with you, in the West. We follow it sort of as a soap opera as it comes through. That's what I've been noticing so far. But the irony that somehow there is a Prime Minister's office connection in some way to what's going on in the Senate is just unbelievable in the West.
Rosie?
Well, and that's, of course, that's the part of what we reported earlier this week around the Prime Minister and Duffy and questions of eligibility. And that will be the part of the trial that is, of course, most fascinating to everyone. However, it is not necessarily the part of the trial that is going to be most damaging to Mike Duffy. It's the part of the trial that will be most damaging to the Prime Minister or anyone who worked for him. So at that point, we are really in the legal story right now, right? But there will be a shift at some point, and it will become highly and perhaps toxically political. The question is whether that will happen before an election or not.
And can I just say very quickly that Mr. Harper, to give him credit, started out as a reformer. I think he came filled with reformist zeal, and he tried a couple of times to reform the Senate as far as he could go within the Constitution. Sometimes when he is frustrated, he flips into a complete cynic, and that may explain to some extent his use of Duffy and Wallen and the others, basically as kind of, publicly paid supporters of the Conservative Party.